And we're back this month with more polling from Mark Penn. I'm Bob Cusack of The Hill. Mark, as we always do to start the show, one word to describe your polling, your fresh polling.
I think this month's word is hope. I think this poll shows that all is not lost for the Democrats. Despite a very difficult situation out there, a president with very low ratings, the congressional horse race still remains close, which means that Democrats should not give up the ship here and have some hope.
And that hope certainly would be in keeping the Senate. The House is going to be difficult to retain based upon history and the president's numbers. Why do you think Democrats have had a little bit of a bump here, as you mentioned? And why do you think that the congressional generic polling is a dead heat with Biden's numbers still low?
Well, Biden's staying at 38% job approval and disapproval on virtually every major issue. But I think in some ways, voters have come to separate Biden, who they largely think is incompetent or not a good president, from the Democratic Party and the Democratic cause in general, as opposed to the Republicans. And so I think the Democrats have some things going for them. Certainly, choice in guns helped rally, I think, some of their supporters who otherwise really didn't have a big issue that they could fasten on because the election been otherwise been dominated by inflation and immigration and crime, all Republican leaning issues. So, and I think finally, the Republican Party is a divided party. Trump is knocking down half of the nominees. Some of the Trump nominees that were successful in the primaries are having, a lot of trouble in the general election, particularly Oz in Pennsylvania. And they don't have an effective message machine out there right now. So that kind of tilts the pay. That maybe tilts the odds just a little bit from what would otherwise have been a pretty dire situation.
And of course, Democrats can't get too overconfident. The numbers on the economy are not good. There's a intensifying debate on whether we're in a recession or not. Technically, we have not heard from this nonprofit group called the National Bureau of Economic Research, which decides it, though we have had data of negative growth in consecutive quarters. What do the economic numbers mean to you, Mark? And do you think this whole issue of a recession, does it matter? Because a lot of people think we're either in one or we're going to be in one.
Well, most people think we're either in one or we're going to be in one, as you say. But we are definitely in a polling recession. If I were the National Bureau of Polling, would I declare an economic recession? Absolutely. Because we have 67% who say that the economy is on the wrong track. And we have 56% of Americans saying their personal economic situation is worsening. These numbers reflect at least a polling recession for sure. And I do think this debate about recession or not, I mean, you could Google it. Every single source and news thing until yesterday has always said that 2 quarters of contracting growth is a recession. Recession is not a depression. It's an economic event that could be mild. It's like rain. It's not a hurricane. So I do think that this whole debate is getting a little silly, and that I always worry, when people kind of take a 1984-ish, freedom is slavery approach. Take it, don't start changing the definition when words go against your party. I really worry about that as a tendency in the public. Definitely from these polling figures, it's the way the voters feel it in their personal economic life. It's the way the statistics show it. And so I think that the administration should be talking about how they're going to get us out of it, or how they're going to make it mild, rather than trying to have a debate about it.
So you think the administration is denying that there's a recession and publicly doing so, that's not really working based upon what Americans are feeling right now?
It's not. It doesn't. It flies in the face of what Americans see at the pump and what they see in the grocery stores, or what they feel in their own personal lives. Buffeted by wage increases that don't match the inflationary increases that they see in the products that they have to buy. And that's the root of their economic discontent. And going into a state of denial, isn't really particularly useful. And it hasn't worked for this administration so far. The border is not closed. It's how, in how many instances can they undermine themselves in this way? So no, I think it's a very counterproductive strategy.
The Department of Justice in your poll doesn't have the approval numbers of prior Department of Justices. And of course, what's going to happen now is that at some point, the January 6th committee is going to wind down. They've started to wind down. They might have more hearings in the fall. But there's going to be a big question. And will Department of Justice indict Trump? What did your polling find on that?
Well, it's really kind of some fascinating polling because a slight majority of people would say Trump's actions border on criminal and he should be indicted. I think that's going to make a big headline, out of this poll. But at the same time, most people think it would be better if we pardoned a lot of the people involved in January 6th and tried to heal the country rather than indict Trump and his aides over this. And most people think, even after they think he should be indicted, think he should be allowed to run for president because they believe democracy doesn't mean letting anyone who people want to be on the ballot. And I suppose there are some Democrats who are kind of hoping he's on the ballot, but they think he can be. They think he can be defeated. What I get out of this polling is one clear thing: indicting Trump will set off a political firestorm, the likes of which the country hasn't seen. And I think it would be a politically unwise move. For that reason, Trump was not. You're basically indicting Trump for his words and speeches, and for his inaction. Perhaps during the crucial hour, and those are moments that were wrong, and those are moments I think that get public condemnation. But then moving the Justice Department against the president in this way, a Justice Department which, by the way, is at 47, lower than the Supreme Court. It never seen a Justice Department with these kinds of ratings. These questions about Trump, they split 50-50. They would give Trump an enormous pulpit that he frankly doesn't have right now. And nothing gets Trump supporters going like a big fight. And this would be the biggest fight. And these state investigations are just seen as partisan hack investigations. So I think it's a big choice. It's a big choice. But I think part of this is, whether or not they're going to let democracy sort this out or not. I don't know. It looks to me, frankly, that the Justice Department is more moving on that. They certainly tend to be doing a lot more on that than on the Hunter Biden scandal.
You mentioned the Supreme Court, abortion obviously dominating headlines in the wake of the official ruling. But it's still not. Abortion and women's rights have not moved up in your poll tremendously. They're not a top 2-3 issue. How do you think that's playing out? The media, I think, does maybe overplay the pro-choice. People feel strongly about abortion on both sides, not just on one side. It does fire up the Democratic base that had been lagging. But where do you see that issue? Any surprises there?
Well, the Supreme Court itself is about 50% approval, as I said, a few points higher than the Justice Department, certainly higher than President Biden. And so it's rating not as high as the 60+% that they generally had. So these are controversial issues that the Supreme Court has gotten themselves into. I found interesting in this poll that more people were getting comfortable with state legislatures making the decision. After all, people some people wanted a constitutional right to abortion, but a lot of people were interpreting the decision initially as banning abortion. And now they've kind of learned, well, abortion's not banned. It's really a state by state decision. You can travel from one state to the other. And so as they learn that, actually the public was almost evenly divided on whether the court did the right thing or not. I do think there's probably some effect in terms of energizing some Democratic voters that might not have been energized, or some economic inflation voters who may become, suburban choice voters instead. And so I think the Democrats, again, pick up something politically, but I do think the country is getting more and more comfortable with letting the state legislatures make these decisions. It's interesting, the state legislatures have really not gotten to make a major social policy decision in quite some time, because the court has generally made all those decisions.
Another big topic we're going to see more headlines real soon on is Nancy Pelosi's apparent planned trip to Taiwan. We had kind of a man bites dog headlines where we had Republicans praising Pelosi for this trip. You don't see that very often, any praise for Nancy Pelosi from any Republican. But people are supportive of this trip, which will likely include Pelosi and other members, but we're not sure exactly when. We probably won't know when she's leaving or when she is going to Taiwan until she arrives for security reasons. What did you find there?
Well, I think that people are generally supportive of her going. I think there's still somewhat concern. There's substantial concern about China and what China would do. I don't see that you see Americans really wanting to provoke a showdown with China. So I think there's mildly positive support for her going on the trip. But what I really find interesting is when I look at polling about the Ukraine and about China, that there's a new political animal I've dubbed the pro-war Democrat. I spent so many years doing polling, which the Republicans were for all the wars. It is now the Democrats who are like more for standing up against China, backing Pelosi's trip more than Republicans going, and it is Democrats who are more behind advanced Ukrainian aid and giving billions of dollars more to the Ukrainians. As I said when we went through the poll, everybody's sort of supportive of the Ukrainians, but the Democrats are willing to pay money and the Republicans not so much. And again, this is a complete reversal of 40 years of polling, in which the Democrats have always been the anti-war party, and the Republicans are now the more isolationist anti-war party.
I want to pivot to 2024. We're seeing some interesting dynamics in your polling. Trump still is up on DeSantis, 52-19. If Trump doesn't run, DeSantis is first, Pence is second. Pence has some decent numbers here amid some skepticism about whether he could actually win the nomination. And also, there have been more and more stories about Democrats either dodging or saying maybe Joe Biden shouldn't run in 2024. What do you see there? Harris's numbers, again, not good. But there's a sentiment we talked about last month too that has continued, is that people don't want to see Biden versus Trump again, and maybe that would spur a third party bid.
Well, look, I think this is a fascinating situation. When you ask them, do they want Trump to run? Most people, nearly 60, say no. If you ask them, Biden to run, over 70 say no. Who is most likely to run at the current moment? Trump and Biden, right? and so this is really a choice that the American public doesn't want, because I say, well, look, if it's Trump v. Biden, would you support a centrist independent candidate? 60% say yes, an astounding number. So these parties are going to have a choice: put up somebody that people don't want, or have a rough and tumble primary fight and find some candidates that the American public views as having next generation solutions, who could really take the country forward, can execute the job of presidency without either being too wacky or too old, right? And I think when you ask it, why shouldn't Trump run? Because he's too erratic, and why shouldn't Biden run? Because he's not a good president. And so I think that it's a tricky situation. I think DeSantis is sitting there in the wings. He's been consistently rising. Trump looks like he's positioning himself for a run. He would not be easy to defeat, although I think he is potentially defeatable because he's getting about 52. And if you're, it's like the old polling we have on incumbents. If you're not voting for him now, you're never voting for him. And so I do think he's got about half the party that doesn't want to see him run. And if you look at Biden's situation is even worse. It's really almost 2/3 of the party that doesn't want to see him run. And I don't think ultimately he will run. I just don't see how it's possible that somebody with his kind of ratings and seen as too old and doing a terrible job can plausibly run. He'd have primary opposition for sure. And it could be very successful primary opposition this time. He won't be able, I think, to be receive the kind of cloaking from the press that he received in the last time. So it's more likely to be Trump v. Harris or someone. And from the public's point of view, I think a DeSantis-Harris race, which is now a dead even race, maybe 1 point for Harris because most people don't know who DeSantis is actually, I think, the most likely race at the end of the day.
And do you think that if that happens, if Biden, who does turn 80 later this year, does not run, that Harris would have a fair amount of company in the primary because her numbers are way below water right now? I think your numbers are minus 15 at the moment.
Well, she's going to have to win the primary. I mean, people don't remember, like Al Gore really started out and looked like he wasn't going to win, looked like he was going to lose New Hampshire. And then he came back and really kind of barnstormed the thing and found his energy and his mojo. So that's going to have to happen with Harris. I can't predict how great or bad a campaigner she really will be, after all these years in the White House and experience with the issues and getting control of the Democratic machinery. I would say that she definitely, even though she doesn't poll that well, doesn't poll as well as DeSantis, has a solid chance given the history of the Democratic Party. Vice presidents always get it. Joe Biden was one of those vice presidents that nobody thought was good enough to get the nomination. And he did, and he's president of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Last question, open-ended. Any other takeaways, and where do you see us going from here? Because the next polling that we'll be talking about will be post-Labor Day. What are you looking for there and right up until the midterm election?
Well, I think another topic in the poll is really energy policy. And overwhelmingly, people care about energy independence, slower transition away from fossil fuels, and they would reverse the Keystone Pipeline decision. If the president were serious about really trying to win back a lot of lost voters here, he would change the energy policy. Now, it looks like they're going to double down on climate change, going to go ahead with a bill that's going to have hundreds of billions of dollars. Voters are kind of very skeptical about subsidizing the world's richest person who makes electric cars. And so I think the energy policy here is one of the things that, look, people are looking to have better economic policy. They're looking to reverse the economic policy. We didn't do it in this poll, but they're looking to reverse the immigration policy, and they're looking for stronger support for the police in the country. And Biden is on none of those issues. And it's a bill now that's trying to support the police that maybe the Democrats will be able to kind of dispel some of their defund the police messaging, but it's being held up because of the people who want to defund the police are a very vocal corner of the Democratic Party, and that's so. I think there's a lot of things to play out here. I always say that Labor Day is the time when Americans sit around with their family and kind of talk about politics. And at that point, they're set. Oh my God, it's about inflation. Oh my God, we have to get rid of these Republicans. I mean, these Democrats who've been running us with tax and spend. Or it's going to be, oh my God, the Republicans, I just can't stomach them, even though Biden's not been a good president. We can't abandon the debt. I don't know how it's going to come out, right? I think there's going to be a pretty strong barbecue discussions, and then we'll come back and poll after Labor Day. And I always find that public opinion really sets in, around that time, and then kind of runs through what we used to call the shoot, the period between Labor Day, and Election Day. The Republicans usually do their messaging late. They're not organized. They don't have a coherent message out there. They don't have anything remotely like a coherent leadership. There's no Newt Gingrich out there with a contract for America or anything like it. So we'll see whether or not they underperform. They have they're saddled with a number of Trump candidates who won primaries that aren't doing that well in some of the key swing states. So I think I agree with you, Bob. It's pretty hard for the Democrats to hold on to the House. However, the Senate is another matter. And is this going to be a wave election as it's been setting up to be, or will all of these new issues and maybe some economic improvements by then reduce the size of the wave to a little bit more of a ripple? We don't know, but stay tuned, and that's what we'll follow here on the Harvard-Harris poll.
Absolutely, it's going to be interesting to see what if Democrats are able to extend this little bit momentum they have and hope, as you mentioned in your next poll. Thanks, Mark.